Good afternoon, welcome. To start out, we're going to do a little exercise. This half of the room assume the position, this half do the search. I want to thank everyone for coming today. Hopefully my journey in life will be informative as well as entertaining. But first I want to recognize this row of beautiful ladies here. Obviously Lana, our two daughters, Kelly and Lindsay, and our two oldest granddaughters, Haley and Ella. I think they're here just to see if what I've told them over the years is the same thing I tell you. I have a few show and tell items. Let me pass a set of credentials around. You can take a look at what real FBI credentials look like. These are given to retired agents when they retire. They're exactly the same thing as the credentials we had as an active agent, but they have retired, not retarded, but retired, stamped all over them. Just pass it around. I was also going to bring my handcuffs, but I know some of you too well, and I didn't think that would be a good idea. I also have a replica of a Thompson submachine gun up here. After I finish the presentation, anyone wants to come up, play with it, take their picture with it, feel free to come on up. It doesn't shoot, it's just a replica. So don't report me to Jim. If anyone, and also if anyone has questions, personally, when I get done, come on up. I'm sure there's not going to be time to keep all you folks in this room when I conclude, so just come on up afterwards. As I go through my presentation, you'll see some photos and newspaper articles that I won't be talking about. When I told Stan how long this presentation would last, he fainted. And as I was patting his cheeks to try and get him to revive himself, he opened both eyes, and the first words out of his mouth were, "Too long." So anyhow, I still have the slides in there, but the script part of it is no longer part of the presentation. Where to start? Two of the questions most asked of me is, why did I want to be an agent? And, pressed wrong because I got it upside down. Why did I want to be an agent? How did I get to be an FBI agent? I'm not sure there was any one thing or one answer. It was more of a 20-plus year journey. When I was really young, I played cops and robbers, like many of us, and I always wanted to be the cop. And later, as I grew a little bit older, I always enjoyed the Hardy Boys books. I think I must have read every one that was out at the time. And then as I got older, I graduated to Mickey Spillane and his PI, Mike Hammer. Now, as a 12 and 13-year-old, I enjoyed the covers as much as the stories inside. In high school, I started thinking about being an attorney. I noticed that attorneys did a lot of things. Sometimes they even kept their hands in their own pockets. Anyhow, rebuttal? But the FBI never entered my mind. I suspect there are some of you out there that had a particular person that changed the direction of your life from that point on. I had one such person in my life. He was my position coach in football my senior year in high school. Yes, that's me. 17 years old. I was a Fremont Ross Little Giant. I have no idea where they got the name Little Giant. My position coach, after the season ended, apparently saw something in me that he thought it was worth his time and trouble. He asked me if I wanted to play college ball. I told him I wasn't good enough, and besides, I couldn't afford to go to college. My dad was a factory foreman, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom whose full-time job at that time was helping me get passing grades in Latin and algebra. If I was to go to college, I'd be going I'd be working during the daytime and taking classes at night. He said, number one, you're right, Woody Hayes and Ohio State isn't going to offer you. But you can play small college football. Number two, we'll just get you a scholarship. He proceeded to take me to several small Ohio colleges to talk to their football coach, show them my film. He did this on his own time and his own dime. At this level of football, the coaches don't come to you, you go to them. One of the schools, Ohio Northern University, in the big town of Ada, Ohio, offered me a 4-year football scholarship. I got to learn how to talk and use the pointer at the same time. Ohio Northern was a neat little school with colleges of liberal arts, engineering, pharmacy, and law. You can't imagine how excited I was to get this letter. Now I could go to college full time. Another blessing was that ONU also had a law school, one of 7 in the state of Ohio at the time. So who was this football coach? His name was Jim Getz. Every Christmas I sent him a card, and I thank him for changing the direction of my life forever. My journey in life has several small world experiences. This is the first. Not many folks outside of Ohio have ever heard of Ohio Northern University, but my village on the green next door neighbor, Barbara Snyder, has. Her daughter-in-law and grandson is a graduate of Ohio Northern University, and she has a second grandson that's soon to be. Moving on. That's me my senior year in college. Why is that up there? I don't know. I was going through old pictures and I kind of liked it, so it's yeah, that's me my senior year of college. I played 4 years of college ball. When I was looking at, it's kind of fun going through this journey of life. You see all these old pictures you haven't looked at in 15 or 20 years. Good memories. I graduated in the spring of 1966 with a Bachelor of Arts degree with a history major. That fall I started law school at Ohio Northern, 199 in the freshman class. I enjoyed law school, but by my senior year I wasn't sure I wanted to spend the rest of my life sitting at a desk in a law office. Plus there was a small matter of the Vietnam War. I knew at the time that I was going to be drafted as soon as I graduated from law school. So what was I going to do? Oops, that's one of the pictures I wasn't going to show you because that's out of the script, I'm sorry. Remember this TV program? I think it was just called the FBI. It was on, as Efren Zimbalist Jr. It was on every night, I think, from 1965 to 1974. I often watched it. Inspector Erskine, was an attorney. I was an attorney. The proverbial light bulb went on where I was almost an attorney. Here was a job that had excitement. It was physically and mentally challenging, and I could serve my country while using my law degree. Little did I know that what Special Agent Lou Erskine did in 60 minutes would end up taking me months and even years. I guess Erskine had better writers than I did. The fall of my senior year in law school, I applied to the FBI through its Cleveland field office. I filled out many forms, several initial and follow-up interviews, and would have occasional contact with the agent in the Lima, Ohio RA. In my interviews, I told the Bureau my earliest possible availability would be at the end of July after I took the Ohio bar exam. At the end of July, anyhow, 1968 turned into 1969, still no word from the Bureau. Around April of 1969, I was asked to come to the FBI office in Lima, Ohio. The agent there looked me up and down and said, "How much do you weigh?" After 4 years of college football, 3 years of law school, the last 2 of which I managed the college bar in town for absentee owners. That meant free beer. Did I mention free beer? Anyway, I told him I weighed about 250 pounds. I thought bigger the better. Well, his face dropped and he said, "We have a problem. Mr. Hoover hires based upon the 1928 Metropolitan Life Insurance height-weight charts." I was 6'2", so I couldn't weigh any more than 197 pounds. I hadn't weighed that since my senior year in high school. By mid-June, after eating nothing but soup and carrots, whoops, I'm losing my place here, let me back up here. Anyhow, I hadn't weighed that since my senior year in high school, but by then I knew I wanted to become an agent, so I told them I'd lose the weight. Graduation came and went in May of 1969. That's a picture of my law school graduating class. If you look closely, you might see one female in there. And if you look for me, if anyone cares, I'm in the back row. I seem like I was always in the back row, but back row center. By mid-June, after eating nothing but soup and carrots and no beer, I was nearly down to 200 pounds. I was soon to learn firsthand how the government sometimes works or doesn't work. While studying for the bar exam in June, I got my pre-induction physical notice. I was to appear on a certain date and time in my hometown of Fremont, Ohio, there to board a bus to Cleveland for my physical. The meeting place was the lobby of the local post office. It was 6 a.m., the bus was outside with the motor running. The lobby had about 30 young men, mostly ages 18 to 20. I was the oldest there at 24, soon to be 25. There was a little old selective service draft board lady with a clipboard. She was standing there. She called out a list of names and scratched them off as they went out to the bus. Pretty soon it was just me standing there. So I took my letter up to her and I said, I'm supposed to be here this morning. She looked me up and down and said, oh, you're the young man that Mr. Hoover is going to hire. Well, that was news to me. So that's how I found out I was going to be an FBI agent. For the record, I didn't receive my official job offer for another 3 to 4 weeks just before I took the Ohio bar exam. My report date was September 8, 1969. Now we're finally getting to the FBI. I flew into Washington, D.C. from Toledo, Ohio on Sunday, September 7th. The next day I was sworn in as a special agent of the FBI. The swearing-in ceremony took place at the Justice Department building on Pennsylvania Avenue. At the time, the FBI had no dedicated FBI office. You would enter to the Justice Department on one corner, and on the other corner, you'd enter for the FBI. There were 52 agents in my new agents class, and I know some of you are looking for a female face in that photo. There were none. Females didn't become agents until 1972. If you look very closely, once again, I'm in the back row, and I actually put an arrow up there so you could find me. Some background about the FBI. It was first known as the Bureau of Investigation and founded in 1909. Hoover became its head in 1924. It didn't become known as the FBI until 1935. Hoover was its only director until he died in 1972. When I was hired in September 1969, the starting pay was around $9,000. Today, the starting salary is around $70,000. When I was hired, they had 9,000 agents. Today, they have nearly 14,000 agents. Of that, 2,600 are females. Now the Bureau hires, when I was hired, almost everyone was either a lawyer or an accounting degree. Now the Bureau hires in categories, females, attorneys, accountants, computer experts, minorities, languages, and on and on. But I can tell you, when I was an agent, we felt an independence from the Justice Department. We work with them, not for them. The FBI office is now on Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. This building was completed in 1975 and was named after J. Edgar Hoover. Outside of the Washington, D.C., the FBI has 56 field offices. Each of these field offices has several smaller offices throughout their territory. Each of these, they're called resident agencies. There are 3 field offices in Jacksonville, or in Florida: Jacksonville, Tampa, and Miami. The nearest FBI office to us is Orlando, which is a resident agency out of Tampa. Now back to training school. Training school lasted about 6 weeks. Our class graduated just before Christmas of '69. Our training primarily took place in Washington, D.C., either in the FBI part of the Justice Building or in the old post office building where the Washington field office was also located. The post office was on the main floor with the FBI offices on upper floors. About 4 weeks of our training took place on the Marine Corps base in Quantico, Virginia, where we had both firearms and classroom work. This is a picture of our old FBI academy in Quantico, 3 floors and a full basement. Even though it was on a military base, the Marine Corps base was situated next to a state highway that was heavily traveled. At the time, we still used the Thompson submachine gun. That's what I have up here. Shades of Elliot Ness and Al Capone. Anyhow, there'd be occasions where all 50 of us would be standing outside that old academy next to the state highway, and there'd be 50 of us holding Thompson submachine guns up in the air. Now that caused more than a lot of looks from passing drivers, as well as even a few fender benders. Fortunately, the FBI Academy now looks a whole lot different. Quite a change. Of all the things we were taught in training class, there's one that I carried with me throughout my 25 years as an agent. One of our instructors cautioned us, "You have been given extraordinary power that few Americans have. The power to deny a person of his life and liberty. Be sure to use that power wisely." Every day I went to work, I remembered that admonition. My first office was Minneapolis. I arrived there on 12/28/69. I was familiar with outdoor time and temperature signs, but in Minnesota, you had time, temperature, and wind chill. This took on added meaning when the temperature never got above 0 for the next 6 weeks. The Minneapolis office covered the entire state of Minnesota as well as North and South Dakota. There were about 50 agents in Minneapolis itself. About half were new agents like myself. Another 30 or so were scattered across the three-state area in resident agencies. As it turned out, I was only single agent in all the Minneapolis division, so I was often the first choice for specials on road trips. One of those specials, they sent me to a small town in North Dakota called Tacoma, population 30. Tacoma is about 50 miles north of Grand Forks, not that anyone here knows where Grand Forks is. Tacoma had been selected as the site of a future anti-ballistic missile site base. Anti-war protests were still going on, and one was planned for Tacoma. I was sent out there to monitor the protests to observe if any federal laws were violated. At the time, the site was just a big hole in the ground with surveyor stakes. Since I was to go undercover at the time, that meant I put blue jeans on to go with my Bostonians. When I got there were a couple of hundred protesters parading around in the big hole, tearing up surveyor stakes. I joined those walking around and noticed a man that was carrying a flag with a red star and a 5-pointed leaf over the star. I looked at that leaf, and I was sure that was a Buckeye leaf. See, I'm from Ohio, and it sure looked like those little leaves that Ohio State football players get to put on their football helmets. I thought that was curious, so I asked the guy, I stopped him, and I said, "Hey, are those Buckeye leaves?" Well, he looked at me and he said, "Dude, what's the matter with you? That's weed." You know, with that response, I think I gave myself up despite my blue jeans. I think he figured out who I was. When I asked him if I could carry his flag, he couldn't give it to me fast enough and made a hurried escape. I'm sure he made me for a cop, either that or he just thought I was playing weird. I never saw him after that. As to the flag, here it is. I kept it all these years as a souvenir. So why didn't I recognize a marijuana leaf? I sense from the laughter out there, a lot of you recognize it. Maybe we should ask you how you recognize it. Anyhow, the answer is because we in the FBI had absolutely no drug training. This probably will surprise you, but the FBI didn't get joint jurisdiction over drugs with the DEA until 1982. While Hoover was still alive, he didn't want anything to do with drugs and drug enforcement. He was afraid that there was so much money around drugs that would likely lead to corruption, and he didn't want to take that chance with his FBI. A side note to this story. At the time, there was an anti-war underground newspaper in Minneapolis called 100 Flowers. I have no idea where the name came from or what it meant. About a week after I got back from Tacoma, on the front page of this underground publication was a picture of someone wearing blue jeans and Bostonians and carrying a flag with a red star and marijuana leaf over it. Yeah, it was me, all right. undercover bill was now on the front page of $100. The banner in the squad area at the time was, some kind of undercover agent you are. You get yourself on the front page of the underground newspaper. And you better hope Hoover doesn't see this, otherwise you may be gone. After that, I never volunteered, nor was I asked to go undercover. Another small world story. Is Sid and Melinda Height here by chance? Ah, they're missing their chance of fame. Until a couple of months ago, I would have bet a whole lot of money that there wasn't any one village on the green, or perhaps in the whole state of Florida, that had ever heard of Tacoma, North Dakota, population 30. As often over dinner, you share how you met your spouse. We were eating with Sid and Melinda, and they said that they met when both were job interviewing with IBM. IBM had a government contract to build an anti-ballistic missile site, and where? Obviously, Tacoma, North Dakota. Small world. The practice back then was new agents would stay in their first office up to a year and then be transferred to one of the Bureau's larger offices. After 9 months, I was transferred to the Chicago division. I arrived there on November 1 in 1970. I was assigned, that's another one of those you're not supposed to see. There you go. I was assigned to the downtown office of the FBI in the Dirksen Federal Building. I went from a small office of maybe 50 agents to one with over 200 agents, all on one floor. I was assigned to what they call Criminal Squad 7. And that's a picture of my squad. At least I escaped the back row, now I'm second from the right. And Squad C7, we work white-collar crime, business frauds, bank frauds, and public corruption. And in May of 1972, J. Edgar Hoover died at the age of 77. A lot of things were about to happen. Not the least of those was that now we could wear colored shirts. I think that left IBM as the only employer mandating white shirts in the workplace. Female agents would now soon be hired. Other changes were more mundane, such as our credentials. For about 50 years, Hoover's signature had appeared on our credentials. Now that had to be changed. You can see that those are my original credentials that were given to me in 1969 on the left. You can see Hoover's signature there. And the new credentials that they gave just has the office of the director. The daily life of an FBI agent is usually pretty safe. However, sometimes danger can pop up when you're least expecting it. One day, mid-morning, I was trying to find the building manager at one of Chicago's infamous public housing high-rise apartments. Just like that shown on the screen. They are all cookie-cutter, built from the same plans. As you notice, in the dark spots there on the backside of that building, it's all open walkway. And that's what's going to happen. That's what happened to me next. As I was trying to find the building manager's location, as I was walking towards the office located at the bottom floor of one of the buildings, something whizzed by my head and right shoulder and exploded at my feet. A Coke bottle thrown from 5, 6 stories above. I didn't wait for bottle number 2 and sprinted to safety of the nearest building. I think most law enforcement agents develop a certain kind of humor to help them better cope with what they see and experience. Let's call it cop humor. I was no different. As I sprinted to safety, believe it or not, I thought, man, what a crappy way to die. And I envisioned my tombstone, done in by a Coke bottle. Not a very macho way to go. Sometimes these situations can end up providing weeks of humor and laughter, usually at the expense of one of us. One of my squad mates had an arrest warrant for a subject who lived in a 3-story apartment building on Chicago's south side. About 5 of us went to the apartment around 6:30 that morning to execute the warrant. After banging on the door and announcing ourselves, the subject's wife opened the door holding the baby. She said her husband wasn't there. Well, we hear that a lot, and most of the time it's not true. So with guns drawn, we commenced the search for the subject. There were several rooms. I entered a room off the hallway by myself. The light switch didn't work. The only light I had was from the hallway. I noticed an empty baby's crib in the middle of the room, but no other furniture. There was a small closet on one wall, not a walk-in, but a small closet with folding doors. The doors were open and I could see clothes on hangers, shoes on the floor, and a bag, looked like a bowling bag, but no legs or anything that looked like a person. I decided to make sure and I approached the closet. As I pushed my hand through the clothes to move them, you know where this is going, don't you? I put my hands and fingers right onto the subject's head and face. He let out a loud scream, and this is where the story gets a little conflicted. My squad mate said I also screamed. But I don't think I did that. I saw Wally. Wally, you know me pretty well. Did you think I would have screamed?
No doubt.
Not the answer I was looking for. Anyhow, fortunately I didn't shoot the guy. As I followed our training, we're taught never to put our finger on the trigger until you're ready to shoot. Otherwise, tripping, being bumped into, being startled like I was, can likely cause an unintended reaction, like pulling the trigger and the gun firing. Well, for the next several weeks, I was constantly reminded that I not only screamed, but supposedly screamed louder than the subject. Just so you know, one of the reasons I didn't see the subject was that he had placed his feet and legs into the bowling bag on the closet floor. I spent 10 years in the Chicago division, but without a doubt, my biggest accomplishment took place on July 8, 1972. That's the right response. I met Lana, now here we are, 2 daughters, 4 grandchildren, and 53 years plus later. I met Lana in January of 1971. We both live in the same apartment complex called Four Lakes. Lana was a school teacher in nearby Wheaton. This apartment complex was about 30 miles west of downtown Chicago. It was built around an old quarry and had some rather large hills, one of which they turned into a ski slope. They made their own snow, had a ski rope tow, and had ski classes. There was even a pub at the bottom of the hill. Well, Lana and I ended up in the same ski class. Neither one of us at the time knew how to ski. There were probably 15 or so of us in this class. Lana looked the class over, immediately went to the instructor and said, "See that hunk in the red ski jacket? I want to meet him. I'm going to kick my ski off and you tell him to come help me." Well, that's exactly what happened. And yes, I was the hunk in the red jacket. I mean, who are you going to believe? You know, a law enforcement officer, or are you going to believe my wife? In 1974, the FBI mandated that each field office have specially trained agents.
Can we have a minute to think about that last question?
You got enough time now? Okay. The FBI mandated that each field office have specially trained agents, thus the formation of FBI Special Weapons and Tactics. I was on the second SWAT team that was formed for the Chicago Division. SWAT was voluntary and was in addition to your regular investigative duties. Over the next few years, I went from team member to team leader to the program manager and head of all the Chicago SWAT teams. In Chicago, we had approximately 40 agents in the program. Here's a photo of one of my Chicago SWAT teams. We were up at Camp Ripley, Minnesota, undergoing cold weather survival training. If anyone cares, I'm the second from the left. The sergeant in front of us was regular Army and assigned to Camp Ripley. His sole job was to keep us alive for that week, barely. I think he was really glad to see us go at the end of the week. Today, each field office still has their own SWAT teams, but the FBI has a dedicated HR hostage rescue team located at the FBI Academy in Quantico. They have 3 teams of about 30 agents each. These teams do not work cases, but are like firemen in a firehouse just waiting for the bell to ring. They have a dedicated Air Force C-130 on standby at nearby Andrews Air Force Base, so they can be wheels up for anywhere in the U.S. within 2 hours. A couple of my most interesting cases in Chicago. Yes, I work cases in the FBI. In Bureau Talk, the case was an advanced fee scam. What does that mean? The subjects are con men. They set themselves of us having financial sources worldwide, and for an upfront fee, an advance fee if you will find a source that will fund the financial needs of the individual companies seeking the loan. Usually the people or companies seeking these loans are unable to get traditional lenders to finance their project as they deem them to be too risky. Generally, to cloud the picture, the con men will involve other con men for a portion of the advance fee. To prove a case like this, you have to show that the con men never had any intention to fund the loan, never had the wherewithal and resources to fund the loan, and had never ever funded any loans. The federal statutes we used were mail fraud, wire fraud, interstate travel, interstate transportation, stolen money, and others. The main subject in this case was an individual by the name of Hope Torrey. Do any of you remember the show Wild Kingdom? It was advertised. It was sponsored by Mutual of Omaha. I think we all watched that on Sunday afternoons. Its sponsor was a Mutual of Omaha insurance company. I think it aired, like I said, on Sunday afternoons. So what's Mutual of Omaha have to do with this scheme? Somehow Hope Torrey befriended the principal of the Mutual of Omaha agency on Michigan Avenue in Chicago. They permitted Torrey to have office space and let him use their phone system. Prospective victims calling Torrey's number would have the phone answered Mutual of Omaha before the call was routed to him. Torrey also let victims believe that Mutual of Omaha supported him. We ended up indicting Torrey and 4 of his con men co-conspirators, including one who used the name, believe it or not, the Marquis Eric de Lafayette. But his real name was Eric Norling from Beverly Hills, California. The advance fees paid by the victims exceeded $400,000. In today's money, that's somewhere between $2 and $3 million. After being indicted, they all pled guilty, with Torrey being sentenced to 6 years in prison. What's most interesting about this case were some of the victims. One was a former professional football player by the name of Fred the Hammer Williamson. He was an all-pro defensive back who played for the Pittsburgh Steelers, Oakland Raiders, and the Kansas City Chiefs over a 9-year career. After football, Williamson turned to acting and directing and was looking for money for a film project. I met Williamson when he appeared to testify for the federal grand jury in Chicago. He was most likable and outgoing. What I mostly remember is him being mobbed by the females in the U.S. Attorney's Office. Another victim was a Hollywood actor by the name of Stuart Whitman. Obviously it's not the dude, but Whitman's the one on the left. Like Williamson, wanted money for a film project. That picture, by the way, was on the set of The Longest Day. Whitman, like Williamson, wanted the money for a film project. Whitman was quiet as Hammer was outgoing. To me personally, the most interesting and lasting part of this case was the assistant United States attorney who was prosecuting the matter. Does anyone recognize this individual? And if you recognize this individual, I'm going to take you to lunch and dinner for the next 2 weeks. Anyhow, does the name Scott Turow ring a bell? Scott is an author of bestsellers, and here's a list of his bestsellers. He sold over 30 million copies of his books. He was a USA on this case I had. His first novel, Presumed Innocence, he partially wrote on the train ride from his AUSA office in downtown Chicago to his home in Evanston, Illinois. I didn't learn any of this about Scott until much later. Scott was one of the first attorneys turned authors far before John Grisham. Let me explain the way it works between the FBI and the U.S. attorneys. The FBI opens an investigation. Once completed, the agent writes an investigative report, which the U.S. Attorney's Office signs to an AUSA. At that point, the agent and AUSA work together. If no more investigation is needed, the AUSA takes the case to the federal grand jury, where the agent will tell the federal grand jury the facts of the case and, in essence, who done it. The AUSA explains to the federal grand jury the law that was violated and asks the federal grand jury to vote to indict or not to indict. Some of the attorneys sitting in this audience may argue a little bit about my license as to explain the process, but that's generally how it works. Given the complexity of a case, an agent or AUSA can end up spending a lot of time together. In this case, we spent a lot of time together. Work-wise, Scott and I meshed and developed a professional appreciation for each other. Through my interactions with Scott, I noticed he was one of those special people that was always willing to pass the credit on to someone else. For instance, here was an article in the Chicago Tribune about the indictment of Tory and his co-conspirators. If you notice in the press release at the bottom, Scott credits me for making this case happen. In all my time of 25 years and all the cases I investigated that ended up being indicted, this is the only time that my name was ever mentioned in the federal grand jury news release as far as the indictment. After that, and it was all due to Scott, you notice that I later learned that not only Scott was that kind of person, that I always give credit to someone else. But Scott didn't forget you either. After I retired and became a PI, I was working for the Howland Knight Law Firm in the Jacksonville office. I got a call from a Jacksonville attorney by the name of Hank Cox. I know Kay and Jimmy Juckins know Hank very well. Hank is the past president of the statewide Florida Bar Association, as well as the president of the Jacksonville Bar. I knew Hank, having worked against him as an FBI agent and for him as a private investigator. Phone rings, I pick it up, and Hank says, "Stull, this is Cox." I just got off the phone with Scott Turow. I was trying to get him to speak at a bar function, but he turned me down. Keep in mind now, it was 30 years since I last worked with Scott, and I probably had only talked to him maybe 2 or 3 times in those 30 years. Cox says, "I didn't know you were good buddies with him." I said, "I didn't know I was either." Cox says, "Well, all he wanted to talk about was you, how you were doing, what you were doing, your family, and so forth." Well, that was Scott just being Scott. The last time I spoke to Scott was at a symposium at the University of North Florida in Jacksonville. This was about 6 or 7 years ago. Scott had no idea I was going to be there. The topic was authors selling their novels to Hollywood. After the presentation, Scott made himself available to meet folks and sign his books. I purposely was at the back of the line as I wanted to spend some time talking to Scott. I saw him looking my way as the line got shorter. The last time we saw each other was now going on 40 years, and probably 10 years since we last spoke. I had no reason to believe that he would remember me or what I looked like or even my name. As it became my turn, he looked at me, paused, gave me a smile, and said, "Agent Stull, how are you?" You know, it really makes you feel good when somebody like Scott remembers a nobody like me. That was truly one of my highlights as an agent. The last Chicago case I want to talk about is what we call the rock concert case. In 1977, 4 rock concerts were held at Soldiers Field. The rock groups were Emerson, Lake Palmer, Pink Floyd, Ted Nugent, and Peter Frampton. Mayor Daley had previously banned all rock groups from using city-county facilities. A few months after Daley's death, suddenly contracts were approved to use Soldiers Field for 4 rock concerts. The suspicion was that someone was getting paid off. This was Chicago, after all. An investigative reporter and TV station started investigating. They obtained an aerial photograph of the crowd at one of the concerts and had a photo expert review it. The expert came to the conclusion that there was anywhere between 15 and 20,000 more people present than what the promoter reported as being present. Well, you know, at that point, you know, the possibility of bribes and that the money from underreporting the sale of tickets was enough that we opened a public corruption investigation. Given the possibility of unreported income in the form of bribes, I partnered with an IRS agent. This investigation took us coast to coast, interviewing promoters, agents, reviewing contracts, business records, ticket records, and tax returns. A human story. On our trip to New York City, neither I nor my IRS counterpart have ever been to the Big Apple. We flew into LaGuardia and took a cab to our hotel which was across the street from John Jay College of Law. It seemed like it took us half a day to get there, but it was probably something about around an hour or so. 3 days later, with our interviews completed, we grabbed a cab at our hotel and we made it to LaGuardia in about 10 minutes. Once we got there, we looked at each other and started laughing. Our first cab driver literally took us for a ride. The score, New York Cabbie 1, FBI, IRS 0. Our completed investigation found that the promoter was defrauding the city of Chicago, the Chicago Park District, and all 4 rock groups by, among other things, underreporting ticket sales by falsely claiming tickets were destroyed when in fact they were sold. The reason I'm mentioning this case, and one of the reasons, what this case demonstrated was the power of federal resources available to federal law enforcement. So how did we prove the promoter sold tickets that he claimed were destroyed? We obtained all the ticket stubs from all 4 concerts from the Chicago Park District. This was 1980. Back then, all there were paper tickets. You walk up, hand your ticket in, they tear it in half, give you half, and then the other half goes in the ticket drop. Each of these tickets had an individual serial number which corresponded to Ticketron's computer records. As I said, there were about 130,000 ticket stubs that we took to an IRS computer center in Ogden, Utah. At the computer center, the data entry clerks entered all the information found on the stubs of these 130,000 tickets. I can't imagine how tedious that had to be with these little scraps of paper, and they're entering all that number into the computer. Once they completed, they ran the results via event, and we were able to show that tickets via ticket number that were reported by the promoters being destroyed were not destroyed, but ended up in the ticket drop, meaning they had to have been sold and not destroyed. I have no idea what this cost the IRS to enter all this information on those 130,000 ticket stubs. The 4 people indicted all pled guilty to various charges. As often is the case, your investigations don't always take you where you want to go or where you think you want to go. Anyhow, in this case, we could not show any monies going to politicians, and perhaps none did. Those were my last 2 cases in Chicago. In late summer 1980, at my request, I was transferred to Jacksonville, Florida. Len and I had grown tired of Chicago, the weather, and especially the 3 to 4 hour daily commute. Len and I both had our own cars, so we closely followed each other on our drive to Jacksonville. We made one stop for the night in the Chattanooga, Tennessee motel. Government per diem being what it was, the motel wasn't the Ritz. For example, our room had a vibrator bed. When was the last time anyone was in a hotel room that had a vibrator? No, don't answer that. That's okay. If you had quarters, well, you were in luck. Anyhow, I had a few quarters. Let me just say that when we left in the morning, I no longer had any quarters. And to top it all off, 9 months later, our first daughter, Lindsay, was born. So now you know, Lindsay. We officially arrived in Jacksonville on November 1, 1980. Culturally, Jacksonville was quite a shock coming from Chicago. Work-wise, it was also quite different. I went from an office of 200 agents in Chicago to an office of maybe 40 agents in Jacksonville. I remember one of my first cases in Jacksonville was a violation of a federal statute that I didn't even know existed. It had to do with profanity over the CB radio waves. Remember when CB radios were real popular? Although I don't think anyone in Chicago owned any, but every 3rd person and their cousin in Jacksonville had a CB radio. I remember taking the case assignment sheet into the supervisor's office and asking him, "Do we really work this stuff?" He looked at me, smiled, and said, "Welcome to Jacksonville." The culprit in this case was a true blue Southerner whose CB handle was Daddy Rabbit. I don't remember what his real name was, but I'll never forget his CB handle of Daddy Rabbit. Anyhow, Daddy Rabbit lived on the outskirts of Jacksonville. His house trailer, where else would Daddy Rabbit live? You had to drive down a dirt lane through pine trees before you came to a clearing where the house trailer's at. As soon as I got into the clearing, I was surrounded by more geese than I had ever seen before in my life. Not only were there are a lot of geese, they were huge geese, the biggest I'd ever seen. When they surrounded the bureau car and they looked in every window of the car. I sat in the driver's seat, looked out, and I'm looking eyeball to eyeball with these geese. Some survival instinct in the back of my brain told me do not get out of the car. These geese were likely killers. Plus there was more geese than I had bullets. I turned the siren on, didn't bother them, and no Daddy Rabbit came out of the trailer either. I figured the smart thing to do was to slowly back out of there, assuming the geese would let me, and thankfully they did. I had visions of my tombstone again, you know, the one about the Coke bottle, except this time it would read, killed by a goose. Again, not very macho. Well, eventually I caught up with Daddy Rabbit without his geese. I advised him to never, ever again swear while talking on the CB. And if he did, even his gang of geese wouldn't keep him out of jail. He promised that he wouldn't, and as far as I know, he kept his word. One of the work hats I brought with me to Jacksonville was my SWAT hat. I was soon tasked to take over the Jacksonville SWAT program in Chicago. In Chicago, I oversaw 40 agents. In Jacksonville, about 10. Surprisingly, SWAT was used more often in Jacksonville than in Chicago. Here's a picture of my last Jacksonville SWAT team. It was taken in the summer of 1994 when we won one of several FBI SWAT teams deployed to Orlando for the World Cup games. If you look closely, you'll notice one female in our group, in the center. Her name was Carolyn Murphy. She was ex-military, an officer from the 82nd Airborne. Murph was a good SWATter, and I'd take Murph to a fight any day. A couple of notable uses of our Jacksonville SWAT team. In June of 1986, we got a lead that an FBI top fugitive was in Jacksonville. Back then, the top 10 was really a big deal. You can remember when you walk in the post office, probably the first thing you saw was the FBI top 10 list. I think all FBI agents dreamed of arresting a top 10 fugitive. This particular fugitive's name was Charles Lee Heron. Heron was placed on the top 10 list in February of 1968 for his part in killing the 2 Nashville, Tennessee police officers. Heron had been on the run for the last 18 years. Our SWAT team surrounded the house where we knew Heron to be. It was around 10 p.m. or so when we called for Heron to surrender and come out. He came out the front door with his hands up and surrendered peacefully. It had been a long 18 years that he had been on the run. And by the way, you might like this, the name of the street, Miss Muffet Lane. I test your memory some more. Do you remember in the mid-1980s, the hijacking of the Italian cruise ship Achille Laurel by the PLO, and their killing of Leon Klinghoffer, a Jewish American? You may recall he was confined to a wheelchair. After shooting him, they pushed him and his wheelchair overboard. As a result, the FBI trained for possible hostage rescue operations on cruise ships. At the time, Jacksonville still had shipyards, and a cruise ship was undergoing repairs. Soon to depart to Miami to pick up a full crew and passengers. En route to Miami, it had been arranged that a full-scale enactment of a hostage rescue operation would be conducted by Navy SEALs, Coast Guard, Air Force, and FBI. A couple hundred airmen from MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa volunteered to be passengers and hostages. They were bussed in and board the ship while I was still in Jacksonville. The Jacksonville FBI participated as role-playing terrorists and scenario controller umpires. My role was that of one of the controller's umpires. About 3/4 of the way to Miami, the assault on the ship began. It was about 2 a.m. Navy SEALs started climbing up the side of the ship. The sides and the FBI SWAT from Washington, D.C. assaulted from helicopters. Both the SEALs and the FBI began engaging the FBI role-playing terrorists. All the participants had weapons, but without bullets. At one point, I had to intervene as a disagreement broke out between one of our FBI terrorists and a Navy SEAL. They were arguing over who shot who first. You know, like those neighborhood disagreements when you were 5 or 6. I had no doubt what was about to happen. Just before they were to the point of physical violence, I stepped in as my role as controller umpire. I made a soundness decision. I declared them both dead. Strangely, this seemed to satisfy both of them. Prior to this operation, we had several days of training in which our Jacksonville SWAT team participated, along with our Washington, D.C. SWAT team. One of the Washington SWAT team leaders was a former Navy SEAL by the name of Tommy Norris. During his second tour in Vietnam, Tommy disguised himself as a local fisherman on a sampan. He went several miles behind enemy lines and rescued downed Air Force pilots on 2 separate occasions, April 10th and the 13th. On April 13th, he had to fight his way out. For these rescues, Tommy was awarded the Medal of Honor. Tommy Norris is the one on the right. Tommy was one of the, for the record, Tommy was one of the quietest guys I'd ever been around. He wasn't anything like a Rambo. Before his second tour was up, Tommy and a fellow SEAL were leading a group of Vietnamese SEALs when they came under heavy fire. Tommy was gravely wounded and left for dead by the Vietnamese SEALs. His fellow SEAL buddy by the name of Lieutenant Michael Thornton wasn't going to leave him there, dead or alive. Thornton fought his way back to Norris and found him barely alive. While carrying out, then he had to fight his way out while carrying Norris. For this rescue, Thornton was also awarded the Medal of Honor. Thornton is the one on the left. This was the only time in history that one Medal of Honor recipient had rescued another. As a result of his wounds, Tommy lost his left eye. After recovery, Tommy left the Navy and eventually applied and was accepted into the Bureau. Tommy became the only FBI agent with just one eye. Tommy didn't wear a patch but had a glass eye. During our training preceding the cruise ship operation, about 12 of us were in a Black Hawk helicopter off the coast of Mayport Naval Station near Atlantic Beach. We were en route to practice rappelling onto the deck of a nearby Coast Guard cutter. En route, the pilots of the Black Hawk were showing off by climbing and then diving, which created kind of a roller coaster effect. You'd come off the floor. There was no restraining webbing on the door, so we were all in a tight mass hanging on to each other so we didn't fall out into the ocean. Well, this pressure change caused Tommy's glass eye to pop out and into the Atlantic Ocean below. I looked over at Tommy, he had a smile on his face, and had his hand over where his glass eye had been moments before. Call it cop humor or whatever, but we all had a good laugh thinking about someone walking on the beach and finding a glass eyeball looking up on him. One question I know some folks want to ask, but are usually too polite to ask. Have you ever been shot at? How many of you out there were going to ask me that question? No, okay, at least one. All right. My answer would be sort of. It was September 19th, 1987. I think it was a Friday morning. We got a call from agents out of Savannah, Georgia, that were working a kidnapping extortion matter. A 17-year-old girl was supposedly being held against her will by Richard Lee Brown, a known convicted criminal. Brown was demanding thousands of dollars from the girl's parents for release. The backstory of this was that the 17-year-old had supposedly been voluntarily traveling with Brown the previous month. So we weren't sure if she was or was not a victim. Brown had led the girl's father from payphone to payphone along I-95. Now they were in Florida, so we took over the investigation and the surveillance. We eventually ended up in Lake City, Florida, on old US 90. Our whole office was involved with my SWAT team taking over the close-in surveillance of the girl's father. The instructions to the father, who we had wired up so we could communicate with him. If you get to the point where Brown wants you to meet with you, only do so in a public place. No room, no car. Repeat, do not get into a room or a car, etc. with Brown. In Lake City, Florida, the girl's father had been directed to a restaurant on US 90 and the payphone inside. Using the payphone, the father received instructions to leave the restaurant and walk next door to a motel. The motel was a typical old-fashioned two-story motel with all the rooms, doors facing the parking lot on US 90. There were no interior corridors or enclosed walkways. All the rooms, stairs, and walkways were exterior. As the girl father walked in front of the motel, Brown appeared out of a second-floor room and yelled to the girl's father to come to the room. The stairway, the father started to comply by using the stairwell at the end of one of the buildings. This was contrary to our instructions. Doing worse than one hostage is two hostages. Our SAC instructed us to prevent the father from going to the room. One of my SWAT units of 2 agents was the first on the scene and stopped the father before he could get to the top of the stairs. The unit I was driving was a couple seconds behind. As I entered the parking lot, I drove directly past Brown. I looked up and could see him standing outside his room on the second floor. He knew from his expression, I knew at that point, he knew his plans wasn't going to work, and he was, quite frankly, enraged. I pulled to the side of the motel and immediately went up the stairs to the second level and positioned myself at the corner. While I'm doing this, the other agents were getting the girl's father off the stairs and out of the way. By the time I got to the second floor, Brown was no longer standing outside of his room. He had retreated into his room. By this time, other agents were now pulling into the parking lot below. Brown, seeing the agents below, started shooting at them from inside the room's doorway. When he started shooting, I was still at the corner on the second floor walkway, waiting for him to show himself. My head, arm, and weapon were exposed. All told, he shot about 14 times. This happened in seconds, but it seemed to last much longer. One of his shots hit the metal railing in front of his room, which resulted in what we in law enforcement call a bouncy bullet. You'd probably call it a ricochet. This ricochet came my way. I don't know how close this bullet came to hitting me, but I heard it go by my right ear, and I could feel the air move past my ear at the same time. It was close enough for me. That photo there with me and a K-9 officer was taken just moments after Brown surrendered, and we were en route to the room where Brown had been held up. The railing in front, that was the metal railing that one of his bullets hit, and it ricocheted towards me on the side of the walkway. Brown was eventually sentenced to 25 years for this, and the question was the girl ever charged? She was 17 years old. Given her age, she was never charged, but was she involved? I think so. Another question people want to ask, where has to do so, have you ever shot anyone? The answer is no. In 25 years, I never had to fire my weapon. In fact, there was only one occasion where I was present in which other agents fired their weapons. That occasion took place in Miami, where my SWAT team assisted the Miami SWAT team in a takedown of a criminal gang called the Jamaican Posse. They were a gang who impersonated cops and ripping off other drug dealers. They were also suspects in several homicides. Miami undercover agents lured them into a supposed drug house, which they intended to rob. There were drugs there, but so were we. The first two making out of the car shot into the door of the drug house. As soon as that happened, we announced our presence and ordered them to surrender. They didn't. The result, one was killed, two were wounded. Despite Jacksonville's small size, I had some interesting notable cases. My biggest bureau case I ever worked started in 1985 and ran for 5 years. I was a senior case agent that directed this investigation. The investigation had to do public corruption in the city of Jacksonville's awarding of professional service contracts. Per city code, the awarding of these contracts had to be objective and based upon merit. The top 3 companies would be sent to the mayor, who would pick one of the 3. At the time, Jacksonville mayor was an individual named Jake Godbold. He served 2 terms as mayor from around 1978 through 1986. We didn't start this investigation until 1985, when Godbold was in his last 2 years of office. The scheme was rather simple. If you wanted the city's business, you hired the mayor's friend, attorney Tommy Green. Green would then ensure that your company would make it to the top 3 and eventually be picked by the mayor. Assisting Green were Raymond Clardy, the city's finance director, Henry Stull, the former 3-man in the mayor's office, and Dawson McQuaig, the city's general counsel. As for this investigation, we literally had rooms full of records, which all had to be reviewed and analyzed. This included all the records of the Green law firm for a 2-year period. We issued 274 grand jury subpoenas for testimony and record production. This translated into over 55 volumes of federal grand jury testimony. Additionally, we have conducted interviews of over 1,300 witnesses. The result of our 5-year investigation was that we indicted and convicted the following individuals. Jacksonville Tommy Green Godbo's longtime friend and supporter, Green was indicted twice for bank fraud, mail fraud, and tax evasion. He was found guilty at trial the first time and pled guilty to his second indictment. He was sentenced to 4 years and 2 years. Our investigation revealed he made over $3 million from city contracts and clients who got city contracts. Dawson McClaig, the city's general counsel, McClaig was also a friend of Green. Our investigation revealed that Green paid McClaig over $267,000 in cash and gifts. In return, McClaig made sure Green's clients ended up being selected. Also, we determined that Green paid McClaig's adult son as a ghost employee of his law firm while the son attended a school out of state. By the way, the school, it was a divinity school. That's what I thought. Henry Stull, this is a special one. Former three-man in the mayor's office, and who at the time was currently the city council director. Stull was convicted at trial of 5 counts of perjury when he denied the federal grand jury his part in the scheme. As to Stull, among those interviewed were 2 city employees, Barbara Brooks and Keith Burrell, who were part of the original selection process. I interviewed Brooks at her city hall office. She stated that Stull came to her office where she and Burrell were evaluating the architectural firms. Without saying anything, Stull took a paper and pen from her desk and wrote, "He wants Willis and Veenstra," and handed it to them. They both looked at it and said, "But they're not in the top 3. He just looked stern, and he took his finger and started pounding on the desk at the note, and then he walked out. As a result, they both put Willis and Veenstra in the top 3, and the mayor Godbold eventually selected them. As an investigator, what Brooks said was gold, but it got even better. The selection of Willis and Veenstra took place in 1979. It was now 1986, 7 years later. While I'm sitting there, Brooks reached into her desk drawer and pulled out the note that Stull wrote back in 1979. She had kept that note for 7 long years, just waiting for someone like me to show up and ask about it. Burrell, who had medically retired from city employment, confirmed Brooks's recollection of what happened. Burrell, unfortunately, had ALS, was confined to a wheelchair, and sadly he was dying. I think Burrell had carried what he had done for Stull on his conscience for a long 7 years, and he wanted to set it right as to what he had done before he died. Burrell demanded to testify. I never had anyone demand to testify before. At trial, on the day he was to testify, I met him and his wife out front of the courthouse. She had parked at the curb. I helped Burrell out of the car and into his wheelchair. I pushed him into the courthouse and to the front of the courtroom where he testified from his wheelchair. After that, when I had bad days as an agent, I would think back to Burrell and his courage. And I tell myself, suck it up and keep going. Raymond Clardy, city's finance director. At trial, he was found guilty on 6 counts of perjury when he denied the federal grand jury his part in rigging the selection process to favor an investment company that had hired Green. You should know that none of the above individuals ever cooperated, even after their convictions. So you're probably asking yourself about the mayor, Jake Godbold. That's a picture of the Honorable Jake Godbold. Despite our exhaustive investigation, we cannot show or find any personal benefit going to Godbold from Green that would sustain an indictment conviction. We did find Godbold using Green's credit card for room and meals while he was in New York City. Stan's tapping his watch, hoping I'm going to hurry up here. I'm doing as fast as I can, Stan. Stan's not even laughing. Anyhow, Godbold did use Green's credit card for room and meals while he was in New York City for city bond closings. He did this only because the city would only pay up to $50 per day for room and meals. So we didn't think that was sufficient to convict him. The last act of our investigation was to have Godbold testify before the federal grand jury under immunity, meaning we could only indict him for perjury if he lied. When under oath, he testified and claimed he knew nothing about what Green Millers were doing, that he was a victim and trusted the wrong people. We reviewed his federal grand jury and could not find any basis for a perjury charge. One of the things we unearthed in this investigation I found most shocking wasn't the criminal conduct of those charged and convicted, but had to do with the mayor Jake Godbold's literacy or lack thereof. In reviewing Green's credit card and charges in New York City, I noticed many credit card receipts signed Tommy Green, T-O-M-Y. As part of this investigation, I took handwriting samples from Mayor Gobbo. I gave the mayor pen and paper and dictated words from the right. I started with Tommy Green. Sure enough, he spelled Tommy, T-O-M-Y. I dictated other words from the right. He struggled mightily, and he asked me how to spell many of the words. He eventually admitted that he couldn't read or write very well. That was an understatement. Here he was, the mayor of a city of 1 million people with a multi-million-dollar budget, and he was very illiterate. Almost illiterate, rather. I found it shocking. For my part in this investigation, for my efforts in this 5-year investigation, I was honored and recognized by a personal letter of commendation from the United States Attorney General of the United States, William P. Barr. There's some cases that stick with you that you never forget. Some of the cases I've shared with you are distant memories I had to revisit in order to share with you today. The case I'm about to share with you, I remember it well, at least my part of it. It's one of the few cases where it affected me emotionally and still does when I think about it. It was the spring of 1987. A 28-year-old Joan Witt had given birth at a Jacksonville hospital to a daughter, Heather Marie Witt. It was the first child for Joan and her husband, Mark Witt. 4 days later, an unknown female entered the Witt's West Side home and abducted 4-day-old Heather Marie. In doing so, Witt's mother, Marie Barrett, was shot and stabbed. The mother, Joan Witt, fled from the home with her daughter in her arms, only to be caught, tracked down, shot, and stabbed. Sadly, the baby's mother, Joan Witt, died at the scene. The baby's grandmother was hospitalized but survived and gave a description of the woman to JSO. That's the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. Here's the artist's conception of that person. In police work, you never know what might break a case wide open. The home that the Witts lived in was off US 90, which paralleled I-10. It was assumed that the killer kidnapper would have used I-10 to get away. It was decided to walk both sides of US 90 from the house to the intersection of the nearest road to I-10. The purpose was to look for anything that might have been thrown out of the kidnapper's car. I don't know who thought this would be helpful. It's probably something I wouldn't have considered, but God bless them. In walking the roadway and conducting the search, a .22 caliber revolver was found alongside the road, a mile or so from the Witt house. An expedited ballistics analysis confirmed this was indeed the murder weapon. An ownership trace of the weapon led us to a retired Wisconsin state trooper still living in Wisconsin. He was immediately contacted and interviewed by the FBI in Milwaukee. He said he gave this gun to his 19-year-old daughter, a Wendy Lee Zabel, who last he knew lived in the Jacksonville, Atlantic Beach, Florida area. He also advised that his daughter had mental issues and was estranged from family. You shake your head when you hear this, you know. If she had mental issues, what in the world was he doing giving her the weapon? At least now we knew the unidentified woman was likely Wendy Zabel. We further quickly identified that Zabel had a boyfriend, a 26-year-old Robert Ryan, and they lived in an apartment complex off Mayport Road in Jacksonville. It was soon determined that no one was at the apartment. Investigation at her boyfriend's employment revealed that a day earlier, the day of the kidnapping, he and Zabel showed up with a baby. Zabel claimed that she had just given birth. As to the efforts to locate Zabel and the Witt baby continued, the apartment complex where Zabel and Ryan lived was staked out. We are now into day 3 of the hunt for Zabel. At this point, we didn't know if they would return or they were permanently gone. I was assigned to be a part of that stakeout team comprised of the FBI and JSO. 2 other agents and myself were in a surveillance van near the entrance to the apartment complex. Our job was to monitor every car entering the parking lot. The 5 JSO detectives were scattered around the entrance to their apartment. Daylight left and soon became dark. I was in the observation seat of the van. By that time, we knew the type and the car license plate that was being driven by Zabel and Ryan. There had been a lot of traffic into the apartment complex, but not the vehicle we were looking for. Our biggest concern was what to do if Zabel was holding the baby if they did return. Would she voluntarily give the baby to us? Could we snatch the baby away from her without harming the baby? The game plan was for us in van to follow the car to its parking spot and block it in, while the JSO detectives swarmed the car. 2 detectives each would grab Zabel and Ryan. The 5th JSO detective would go for the baby, wherever she was. At around 6 p.m., the car entered the apartment complex parking lot. By that time, we had watched a lot of cars come and go. None belonged to Zabel or Ryan. As I went by, I noted the license plate. I did a double take. It was the license plate of Zabel's car. You know, your mind starts to play trick on you. Did you really see what you just thought you saw? It was their car. I radioed the JSO officers that the subject car was heading their way. It was dark. We couldn't see inside the car. We didn't know who was in the car or even if the baby was in the car. We slowly followed the car toward their apartment with our lights off. They pulled into a parking place in front of the apartment, and we pulled in behind them, blocking them in. JSO detectives then swarmed the car. Our biggest concern was quickly alleviated. The baby was in the back seat. Both Zabel and Ryan were in the front seat. They were quickly arrested and handcuffed. The 5th JSO detective recovered the baby from the car seat and cradled Heather Marie in his arms like she was his own. He was so emotionally involved, he refused to let go of the baby when the paramedics arrived. In fact, he held on to Heather Marie until rescue got them to the hospital, and only then did he hand her over to the waiting doctor. And yes, the baby was fine. As I told you, this emotionally gets to me. This is the picture of the funeral for the mother. That's her husband, Mark Wood. That's the baby, and that's Mark's mother holding the baby. That headline at the bottom, that always gets me going too. Anyhow, that's a picture of Wendy Lee Zabel and her boyfriend. Zabel later pled guilty to murder in state court. It was a plea agreement. The state wouldn't seek the death penalty. She pled guilty and waived all rights to appeal. She was sentenced to life without parole. Her boyfriend wasn't charged. He apparently was duped. Hard to believe, but yeah, he was. Why did she do it? She wasn't able to have children. She wanted one. So she killed to fulfill her desire. Anyhow, I have a couple more, probably another 15 minutes to go. If somebody wants to leave now, please feel free to leave. Otherwise, unless Stan comes up here and pulls the cord out away from me, I'll stop. But if anyone wants to leave, please leave. You want me to cut it off? Is that what you want me to do? All right, let me make it, I'll quickly end this. If I have one more thing to share with you, and if you ever want to know what happened to it, it was my last case involved 300 kilos of coke and a shipment of bananas in the Florida lottery. And if you want to hear the rest of the story, talk to me later and I'll share it with you. In closing, Stan's smiling. I officially retired on August 13th of 1994. Yes, that's me when I was much younger. That's wife Lana and our daughters, Kelly and Lindsay. After over my nearly 25 years as an agent, I had cases resulting in over 250 individuals pleading guilty, with most going to prison. In that time, I probably had no more than 15 trials. Of those, only 2 were found not guilty. For all my Democratic friends out there, one of my congratulatory retirement letters was from my good and close personal friend, President Bill Clinton. You see his signature there? How do you say auto pen? So what did I do next? I was 50 years old, had 2 daughters still in middle school. The next 20 years I worked as a licensed private investigator. For 10 of those years I worked as an employee of the Holland Knight Law Firm in Jacksonville. And in that small world department, while a Jacksonville private investigator, I was hired by none other Jimmy Judkins to work on a case he had in Jacksonville. Small world indeed. One last story, I promise, Stan. In the summer of 2009, the FBI made Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. an honorary FBI agent for his positive presentation of the FBI and FBI agents. I didn't become aware of this until the spring of 2010, when an article appeared in our monthly Ex-Agent magazine. As a result, I wrote a letter to Efrem Zimbalist telling him that he was probably the catalyst that made me want to become an FBI agent. You see my letter on the left. And surprisingly, a few weeks later, I got a letter back from Efrem Zimbalist. And it was a short note, as you see there, but it was done on a typewriter. When's the last time you've seen a typewriter in action? Anyhow, it was a very kind letter. In his letter, Efrem Zimbalist said, I have had many rewards for my work in films, but none can compare to knowing that an idealistic young person like you was influenced to take up a life of self-denial and public service through watching our show. I was really touched by that. And finally, the question I always get asked, would you do it all over again? My answer, you bet. Thank you.